Hello everyone, welcome to my channel if you're new here, and if you're a returning subscriber, thank you for being here. So I have a very unhealthy fascination with the Rococo era of France and the French Revolution. Not the French Revolution per se, but things that led up to it, but I really love the decadence of the Rococo era. And I wanted to start a series on this channel where I talk about royal history and everything that kind of led up to the French Revolution. And yeah, I've had a fascination with Marie Antoinette in particular since I was 13 years old. And I'm going to talk about her life, but before her life and the things that led to the world that she was born into. So I don't know how long the series is going to last, but I will try to do weekly videos along with vlogs and all these other things that have to do with my personal life. But I wanted to do this kind of historical deep dive because people in my personal life don't care about this stuff, so I have to talk about it on the internet, which is why I started a YouTube channel in the first place. But okay, today we're going to be talking about Empress Maria Theresa of Austria, aka the Mother of Europe, and you're going to see why she was called that, and she is Marie Antoinette's mother. So I'm going to talk about her life, the world she was born into, and that will lead on to many other things that we talk about in this series. So let's go. Before we meet Maria Theresa, we need to understand the world that she was born into, like I said. So she was born into a world called the Holy Roman Empire. And despite its name, it was not Rome, it was not Roman. And the French philosopher Voltaire joked that it was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. So it was a bunch of small kingdoms, duchies, cities, and all of this stuff around places that we now call Germany, Austria, the Czech Republic, parts of Italy, and other countries, right? They had their own rulers and their own royalty, but they chose to be basically under the banner of what they called the Holy Roman Emperor. So for 300 years, the crown of the Holy Roman Emperor and the Holy Roman Empress had stayed inside of the House of Hapsburg, which was Austria's ruling family, like how in England today we have the Windsors. So just imagine if the Windsors had been around for 300 years unchecked, basically. So the Habsburgs, they were a very, 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 very Catholic powerhouse, and they ruled Austria, Hungary, Bohemia, parts of Italy, and the Austrian Netherlands, and the court was established in Vienna, Austria. And they were obsessed with etiquette and ceremony and bloodline of being part of the Habsburg dynasty. And I also want to talk about how Austrians were viewed, because what I love about history and what fascinates me about history is the more you look into it, you realize people haven't changed. We just have technology, and that's really it. Other than technology and I would say hygiene, and the concept of upward mobility, because upward mobility did not really exist before the way that it does now, people are exactly the same. They're still backstabbing, conniving, cheating, drama, all of this drama. So you see these pictures of these grand men and women in these beautiful, like, decadent costumes with all of this power, but you find out that they had a pretty crazy, tragic life. And just like there is now, there was, the R word, there was xenophobia, all of these things. So that always fascinates me when you find out how people viewed each other. So I wanted to see how they viewed Austrians in Europe, just like how Americans view other countries, how other countries view Americans, how, a German person is viewed by an Englishman, those sorts of things. So at that time, the Austrians were basically seen as the old guard, like how Americans would probably view the British. They were very Catholic, very traditional, and they were tied by blood to basically every royal house in Europe, because it was a very prestigious thing to marry into the Habsburg family because they were very powerful. And apparently the French saw them as very stuffy and rigid and overly ceremonious, because Versailles in particular was very fashionable, very new, very trendy, very up to date. So it was giving Paris, it was giving New York Fashion Week. That's what Versailles was giving at the time, right? And Vienna was seen as very grand but very old fashioned. And the Protestants, because the Catholics and the Protestants had beef for a long time, but the Protestants saw Austria as suspicious, and the English saw them as a useful ally against France, because all the European countries, even though they were all basically cousins and all married into different each other's families, they all hated each other also, and they were all scrambling for power, money, and status and all of that jazz. And the Prussians, which are not Russians, because a long time ago I thought that Prussia was somehow related to Russia, but it was just called Prussia. They saw Austria as rivals, and so yeah. But everyone, despite how they viewed Austrians, they viewed them as respected, right? And like I said, marrying into the Habsburg family was to marry into the oldest royal blood in Europe, because they had been around at that point for 300 years. And now I'm going to talk about Maria Theresa's parents, because how she grew up affects how she raised her children, because we all know it starts in the home. So, Charles the Sixth. There's another Charles the Sixth of France. So when I Googled him, I was a little confused, but Charles the Sixth of Austria was described as a very serious man. He was born in 1685, and I'm going to talk a lot about age, because I think in history, we sweep age under the rug, and we just see people as, oh, she was just a frivolous woman spending all this money, but then you realize, okay, well, she was 15 years old. She was 17 years old. So, like, what 17-year-old is good with money? Were you good with money at 17? I don't think so. I wasn't. So, Charles VI had an older brother. His older brother, Joseph, was the emperor, and he wanted to be king of Spain. I didn't read deep into this, because I was like, this video is not about her parents. This is about Maria. But her dad was basically obsessed with being the king of Spain, and to the point where he moved to Spain and was basically telling the King Philip, like, I'm the king. Like, I'm gonna be the king. And he was trying to basically figure that out. When he was 19 years old, his family arranged for him to be engaged to the 13-year-old. And before we get, okay, first, we're talking about history. We're talking about 200 years ago. And a lot of people passed away when they were like 50, 40 something in childbirth. Okay. So when you, as a woman, reach the time of, the red wave, that's when you would be married off, because you were seen as, okay, there was no such thing as a teenager. A teenager came into conception like in the 1940s. That's really when they started even talking about really being a teenager. Before you hit the red wave as a woman, you were seen as a woman. Okay, so, all right, that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about now. Now this would be horrible, evil, immoral, whatever. We're talking about the mentality that people had 200 years ago. Okay, just putting that out there. All right, so when he was 19, he got engaged to the 13-year-old Elizabeth Christine of Brunswick-Wolfenbüttel. I don't know how to pronounce, I don't speak German, I'm so sorry, but I'm trying to pronounce that right. And they said that she was very beautiful, she was gentle, she was a devout Lutheran, so she was a Protestant. She was very pale and she was blonde, and they basically viewed her as one of the most beautiful European noblewomen in like all of Europe, okay? So that's when they got engaged. So they're 6 years apart in age. When he was 23 years old and she was 16, they got married. And even though she married into an Austrian royal house, the wedding was held in Spain because, like I said, Charles was obsessed with trying to be the king of Spain. And by the time they got married, his rival, King Philip, already had a son. So Elizabeth was under extreme pressure to have a son because Charles's older brother, he had 2 daughters and he had also had a son, but the son passed away before his first birthday. Then Joseph was having affairs and caught an STD that made him sterile and made his wife sterile, so they could not have any more children. Now they had a succession crisis because women could not inherit the throne or the father's titles or anything like that, so it was a whole drama. And so this poor girl Elizabeth was only 16 years old and had to basically get pregnant immediately and had to immediately have a son. But guess what? It didn't work because stress is bad for conception, okay? And so for 8 years of their marriage, Elizabeth didn't have any kids, and they thought that she was infertile, even though she had a fertility test before she was able to get married. And apparently, I guess she passed the test, obviously. But then when she got with her husband, then somehow she could not have a child. And it got to the point where it was so bad that she was prescribed tons of wine to drink. Like the doctors literally told her, you need to drink wine and drink a bunch of alcohol. And she drank so much alcohol that her face permanently blushed. They thought she was going to be able to conceive by being drunk. I don't know the logic there, but we're talking about 200 years ago, okay? She also had to take pilgrimages to Catholic holy sites, and then she went to astrologers and psychics and all that kind of stuff, diviners, which I don't think that that helped her, in my opinion. And then it got so bad that they said that the royal bedchamber was painted with images of men to aid her during she and Charles's, marital time, so that she could just be so inspired by the images that she would just get pregnant. And so finally, when she was 24 years old, she did get pregnant and everyone was overjoyed. And then her firstborn child, Archduke Leopold, was finally born. And there were gold medals and different coins made in his honor. And there were operas and plays composed for him because the Austrian people finally had an heir to the throne and they were overjoyed. But unfortunately, he passed away 7 months later. And the thing is that people were hoping at the time that because she and her husband were not like cousins, first cousins, second cousins, you know how that goes. They were hoping that, the baby would be healthy, but the baby was not healthy. And everyone was just so sad. She was very sad. She was extremely depressed after the child passed. She became very, had postpartum depression and was overeating. And her health got basically so bad that she became obese and had to have a special chair that was made. It was very, very tragic. And then she, of course, got pregnant with Maria Theresa. And when she was born, the whole court was disappointed because she could not inherit her father's titles. And then she finally had another child, the third child, which was a daughter. So it was just extremely sad. And I'm reading from Wikipedia here. It said that the doctors prescribed a rich diet to increase her fertility, which made her so fat that she became unable to walk. She had breathing problems, insomnia, and dropsy. And she had to be lowered into her chairs by a specially constructed machine. Charles, though he did love her, he was very concerned about her because his diaries have survived. So he did write about her and gave her a pet name and was very concerned about her health and left her a lot of money in his will. Get to Maria Theresa being born, and she was educated by Jesuits. So her education was extremely Catholic, very moral, and a little bit limited compared to what a man would receive. Of course, she learned French, Italian, Spanish, Latin, and German, and she was taught dancing, music, painting. Her father never let her be trained in statecraft or military strategy or government affairs, never brought her into his council when they were having meetings. And because he knew that he was not going to have any sons and his wife's health was very bad, he basically passed a law saying that if he passed without a son, that his daughter would inherit everything. Austria, Hungary, Bohemia, Italy, all of that. And he spent 20 years going to basically everywhere in the Holy Roman Empire and made all of the princes and stuff sign an agreement that said that, you guys will all agree that she will be the empress when I pass away. So they did sign, of course, because she did become the Holy Roman Empress. And in regards to Maria Theresa's personality, she was described as charming, warm, and lively, and she had blue eyes, blonde hair, and a very full, pretty face. And they said that she loved to dance, she loved music, and loved horseback riding, and had a quick, easy laugh. When she was 6 years old, there was a duke who arrived at the Viennese court, and his name was Francis Stephen of Lorraine, and he was a member of one of the noble families of Europe who was French-speaking. He was 15 and she was 6, okay? But apparently she fell in love the moment that she saw him, and we have all been kids and saw an older person and thought, wow, he's the bee's knees, okay? So they grew up around each other, and he was educated alongside her at Viennese court, and he was kind of like a foster son to her dad. And then by the time she was a teenager, she was literally head over heels in love with him, and he was in love with her too. But here's the problem. He was the Duke of Lorraine, which is a French-speaking territory that France wanted to basically get as part of France. So as a part of the political negotiations to allow the marriage, Francis had to give up his country. And he was given the Grand Duchy of Tuscany, of course, which is in Italy. And they got married when she was 18 years old. He was 27. He was very, 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 very in love. When Maria Theresa's dad passed away suddenly in October of 1740. They say he passed away from eating poisoned mushrooms, apparently. She was 23 years old and pregnant with her 4th child. And then there came a war of Austrian succession. So basically, everyone who signed the dad's document and said, okay, we'll support her when she gets on the throne, did not care. And they went to war for the next 8 years. and she had to fight to keep herself on the throne. And she famously said a quote that if she was not pregnant, because she was basically pregnant every year that she for like 19 years. So she said that if she wasn't pregnant, she would have rode to battle herself and led the military against Frederick of Prussia, because she could not stand that guy. So in 1745, her husband was elected as the Holy Roman Emperor, and apparently she could not technically be the emperor, but she was the ruler of the Hapsburg lands, and everyone knew it. And now she was Empress Maria Theresa, Queen of Hungary, Queen of Bohemia, Archduchess of Austria. So in 20 years, she had 16 children. So between 1737 and 1756, she gave birth to 16 children. And now I'm going to walk you through all of them. She had her first child, Maria Elizabeth, when she was 19 years old, and she unfortunately passed away at age 3. Her second child is named Maria Anna, and she had her when she was 21. Then Maria Carolina was born when she was 22, and she passed away in infancy. Her fourth child was Joseph II, and he was born when she was 23, and he was the future Holy Roman Emperor and the beloved heir that they were all waiting for. The fifth child was Maria Christina, and she was born on her mom's 25th birthday. And she was her favorite child, and she was seen as beautiful, talented, and the only one allowed to marry for love. And then she had another child named Maria Elizabeth, and she was 26 years old when Maria Elizabeth was born. And she was once one of the great beauties of Europe until she developed smallpox. Then she had Charles Joseph when she was 27 years old, and he unfortunately passed away at 15. And when Maria Theresa was 28, she gave birth to Maria Amalia. Then her ninth child, Leopold II, was born when Maria was 29. And then her 10th child was born when she was 31 years old, Maria Carolina, who was named after her other sister who passed away, and she passed away as a baby. And then next, when she was 32, she had another child named Maria Joanna, who unfortunately passed away of smallpox at age 16. And then next, she had Maria Josepha when she was 33 years old, and then she also passed away of smallpox. And then next, when she was 35 years old, she had Maria Carolina, who later on went on to become one of the most powerful queens in Europe. And then her 14th child was Ferdinand, and she had him when she was 37. And then next, when she was 38, she gave birth to Maria Antonia Josepha Joanna, who would later be Marie Antoinette, Queen of France. And then next, her last child she had was Maximilian Francis when she was 39. Out of her 16 children, 10 of them lived to adulthood. And she was very, very deeply affected by the 6 children that passed away. And she wrote in her letters to her children that she had lost angels, which referred to their siblings. So, when she was 48 years old and her husband was 56, they were attending the wedding of one of their sons. And after returning from the opera, Francis collapsed in the corridor of the palace in Innsbruck, and he had a stroke or a heart attack, and he had passed away within minutes. She was devastated, and she cut her hair off, and she wore black and gray for the rest of her life, and painted her rooms black, and she kept his rooms exactly as he had left them. And she wrote in her prayer book the number of days and hours that she had been married to him. 29 years, 6 months, and 6 days. And she counted the days that she lived without him until she passed away 15 years later. After he passed away, she began to govern jointly with her eldest son, Joseph II, who was now the Holy Roman Emperor. And he was very, very modern. He was very like, oh, we're in the new age. He was into enlightenment. She was a very conservative, devout Catholic. So they quarreled all the time and did not see eye to eye. Maria Theresa is most famous for marrying off her kids. And she said, Europe makes war and Austria makes marriages. And she made peace with France, which had been Austria's enemy for so long. And she never stopped writing to her children. Every month and every week, and sometimes every day, she would write letters to literally every single child. And she lectured them on God, on duty, on modesty, on managing money. And her grandchildren would, within 30 years, sit on the thrones of France, Naples, Tuscany, Parma, and the Holy Roman Empire. And that's why she's called the Mother of Europe. And that's where we leave her for now. Thank you guys so much for watching this, and let me know what you think, and I will see you guys in the next video.